In terms of the crisis, one piece of the crisis that I think will stand out as the linchpin of the entire global banking crisis was when Lehman Brothers was allowed to fail, because Lehman Brothers was really a key player in keeping the bubble economy in America going. Nobody doubted that America was a bubble economy, that the real estate market was a bubble that kind of was inflated and crashed. It crashed in 87 and then it was inflated again. Then the bubble, moved into NASDAQ, which inflated and then crashed. Then the bubble went into the real estate market that inflated and crashed. Nobody doubted that America's economy was basically bubble economics, or as they say on Wall Street and across the land, fake it till you make it. That's the American dream. That's the Horatio Alger story. Fake it till you make it. Buy a power suit and a power tie. Go down to Wall Street and just make it if you can fake it. Now, Lehman Brothers was really the headquarters for make it till you fake it. It's the storied brokerage firm where the shoeshine boy became a multimillionaire. It was the home of Marty Shafroff, who was the most successful cold calling stockbroker in history, who started with nothing and ended up making more than $2 million a month just cold calling people on the phone. He invented the Lehman style of cold calling, telemarketing. He wrote a book, Telemarketing in the 1980s, which became a classic and the Bible for all stockbrokers at that time, myself included. And Lehman Brothers personified and embodied the aesthetic of the Wall Street, fast-talking, telemarketing stockbroker that you could say without which there would be no Google, there would be no eBay, there would be no NASDAQ, there would be no Apple, there would be no Microsoft. These companies went public and were distributed across the land because of stockbrokers on Wall Street calling people up and getting them to buy these stocks. Otherwise, they would never have bought these stocks. Now, that's obviously the bull side of the story. The bear side of the story is that there's a tremendous amount of abuse that goes on. But, buyer beware, caveat emptor, and, if you get called by somebody on the phone trying to sell you something, you really got to think about it before you go forward. But it doesn't necessarily mean that 100% of the time he's going to be a complete washout. But Lehman Brothers was really the nexus of this breed of entrepreneurial banker, merchant banker, who was able to push billions of stocks into the portfolios of millions of Americans. Now, when that sucker went down, you basically killed the goose that was laying the golden eggs. Lehman Brothers destruction. And remember why Lehman Brothers was destroyed. Because basically Goldman Sachs owed Lehman Brothers billions as part of some bond transactions. Goldman Sachs, because they had Hank Paulson in the Treasury, because they had Robert Rubin and all these ex-Goldman guys totally infiltrating the U.S. government and totally had the power to do whatever they wanted, they got the Bush administration to put a slug in the back of Lehman Brothers and Dick Fuld and to kill it. Why? Because this way they would not have to pay back Lehman the money they owed Lehman. That's all it was about. They killed their creditor. That's all that was about. Why was Lehman Brothers allowed to fail? That was it. Because Goldman is a cheap group of people whose own self-interest for that week trumped the economic interest of 300 million Americans for their lifetimes and future generations. That's why Goldman, in my opinion, and I'm not the only one who says this, should be taken before a Nuremberg-style war crimes tribunal and dealt with accordingly. They really did kill America. Goldman Sachs did. And they did so when they killed Lehman Brothers. Why? Because they're cheap, not because they're greedy. If they were greedy, they would have done something else. It was because they're terminally cheap. And that's the story of Lehman Brothers. Now let's go.
I wanted to say one thing. In fact, I think that the Lehman Brothers collapse was a way also to, because it was with the Lehman Brothers collapse that the crisis then spread to Europe and Asia. It was all the credit default swaps on Lehman Brothers were held, the counterparties were in Europe.
That's right.
So it did, remember, suddenly it went from being a U.S. crisis to a global crisis from there.
Right. The global banking system was really a house of mirrors, where all of the derivative products and these credit default swaps and other derivatives were basically mirror contracts held in mirror portfolios and mirror banks around the world. And it worked to some degree and was able to provide liquidity to some degree and provide some hedging mechanisms to some degree. But when you took Lehman Brothers out of the picture, it was like you dropped a bomb in a house of mirrors. No mirrors worked at that point. Everything collapsed, and that's what happened. And we're still suffering the consequences of this today, is that all the counterparties for all these trades are all collapsing. And now gold, which is the ultimate arbiter of all this, is saying, forget it. It's never going to, Humpty Dumpty will never be put back together again. That's why gold's going to 4,000 and higher.